Hey, everybody. This is Brian Hunt, and welcome back for another episode of Risk On, Risk Off. For those who are new to the show, this is sort of a bi-monthly, maybe monthly episode I do on a regular basis where I bring in, experts in their field, respects to various facets of risk. We talk a lot in this program about risk as associated to construction and real estate, but we also delve into other areas that sort of go beyond just construction because these areas are not immune to the whims and change in the winds domestically, internationally respects to risk. And I think we've all learned over the years that, things that can happen on the other side of the planet can impact us at home. And when it comes to insurance, can't insure everything. And when it comes to risk, there's not a way to transfer everything. So there's ways that companies need to think about as far as reducing their exposure risk to operational and systematic risk. And like any process, when you're dealing with risk, the more you know, the better off you can make an informed decision. But historically, there's just never been, say, options for everything, whether it be even insurance or just even ways to come up with ideas to be more knowledgeable and come up with ways, at least internally, to transfer it or mitigate it. So to that point, I had this opportunity. I reading the Dallas D magazine article about an individual who spent his entire career in the service of the country working for the FBI, dealing with risks at various facets, but now moved into the construction realm to try to help construction owners reduce their risk to various types of risks, specifically wage theft. And I was very grateful. I reached out to this individual to come on the show, and I'm very excited at this point to introduce to you Mr. Matt DeSarno. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Brian. I really appreciate it. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Well, Matt, I mean, obviously you got a very interesting background, and for those of you, we'll talk about your career. And I read about you in the D magazine. I was like, man, that's the kind of guy I'd like to get on this show because I think it's what you're doing is very fascinating to help construction firms reduce their risk. But you come at this approach sort of differently in the sense that not only bringing technology to help firms reduce their risk, but you spent your entire year basically in the service of the country working at the FBI. And so before we dive into that, Matt, you're about my age. You probably make this popular reference. If I was sitting there and asking you, we're playing the game, where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? So where in the world is Matt today?
Yeah, that's right. I am sitting right here in Dallas, Texas, not far from you. But that's where I live in Dallas by choice. I've lived all over the country and different parts of the world, and this is where I want to be.
Awesome. Well, I think you are like most of us in the country. I make the joke, and I go to events. I was born and raised here in Irving. Most people say, "Oh, you're the guy," because everybody's from someplace else when it comes to Dallas, and it keeps on growing. I obviously want to get into that how your path got here to Dallas, but let's start the basics, Matt. Where'd you let's talk about your background. Where'd you grow up?
Yeah, so I grew up in a place where nobody's from too, just like you. I grew up in Washington D.C., and there are very few actual Washingtonians, but I can boast on one side of my family tree goes like 9 generations to the District of Columbia.
Wow.
Yeah, and then the other side are Italian immigrants. But yeah, I grew up in D.C. My parents and my siblings and I were all born in the district. Lived there until about 7th grade, I guess. My father was an FBI agent as well, so we moved around a little bit and then came back and ended up going to high school in that area too.
Great. So obviously that is funny because I don't meet too many people I've actually heard who are from DC, but more importantly, multi-generational from DC. So that's a new one because that many
long-suffering Washington football fans,
Yeah, well, with a Cowboy fan here, we've been suffering for quite a while too.
yeah, the same. But you guys have more optimism than we do. We
Maybe
know,
so.
We know
we're delusional. We drink the Kool-Aid every year and we keep on getting the same results.
Correct.
So Matt, let's talk about you. So you grew up in DC, but you went off to college. You went to the University of Richmond. What was your attraction to go to Richmond?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to be in the FBI since I was a little kid, and I had an opportunity because my father was to meet a lot of agents growing up, and they said, "Hey, look, the good way for you to get in is to go serve in the military." So I competed for and got an ROTC scholarship, which basically paid for me to go to school wherever I wanted. So I looked at a bunch of schools. I didn't get into some schools. I got into others, and University of Richmond was just a place that to me seemed like the right place. I had a cousin who went there before me who played basketball there, and I had been there before and really liked kind of like the campus. I like the people. I like the atmosphere. It's a wonderful place. It still is a very big part of my life. I still have lots of friends and associates from those days, and I still spend a lot of time with the university, actually career services portion of the university, helping young students figure out what they want to do.
Oh, that's fantastic. So,
Yeah.
so obviously you kind of had a focus early on. I was like, when did you your father was in the FBI? So when did you know you wanted to get into the FBI?
Oh man, I can't remember ever really wanting to do anything else except
Yeah.
be either a professional baseball player or an FBI agent. And I think
So you're back. So baseball was number one. Your backup was getting the FBI.
Yeah. And I've always said throughout my career, really, there are very few jobs I think that are as rewarding and fun and just overall a great professional life than the FBI. Maybe a professional baseball player or a professional golfer, but really it was something I wanted to do since I was a little tyke and kind of set my sights on it and was able to do it.
So let's talk about that. You obviously you had you and I talked about my sort of background as far as well, my career, and I think you and I were sort of thinking the same pathway. So you went to Richmond and you go to the Army, and so you spent a couple of years in the Army. Tell me how that time in the Army sort of helped you going forward in your career.
Oh yeah, I mean, so I was in Clinton's peacetime Army, 95 to 99. I got sent to Fort Hood, Texas, which is Fort Cavazos now, and I was in the 1st Cavalry Division. I was in an infantry battalion. I was a young platoon leader. Had just a great leadership lab for me. Got to deploy to Bosnia as a company executive officer. I got to finish out my career as a battalion adjutant, so I get to see things from the battalion staff level, and really got to really practice and hone and build real leadership skills. And as it relates to risk, I mean, you're talking about being a 22-year-old kid charged with the life and welfare of 39 young men. It was an infantry battalion in that time, so I had 39 young men in my platoon. And then I had a group of NCOs that were older than me and more experienced than me that worked for me, so there was that dynamic. And then you've just got constant life safety risks and other kind of operational risks that you're managing, and learning how to manage and learning how to not be kind of limited by those risks, but manage them and operate through them. So I think it's a great learning experience for any young person to go into that kind of environment at that age with that level of lack of experience and really grow.
Fantastic. So obviously you did your time, 4 years, and before you went to the FBI, it looks like you had a little time down in Austin working for a little small firm like Dell. What was your experience at Dell?
Oh, it was great. So I applied to the FBI and there was a hiring freeze. So I was already kind of out processing the Army, and I went to work at Dell in the server factory. It was called Parmer 1. It was on Parmer Lane and I-35.
Okay.
It's where Dell built all the servers. There was they built the Optiplex desktops a couple miles away down the road, and they built the servers in that facility. And in that facility, every single first line manager in the facility was a combat arms Army officer coming out of the Army. So
really,
I worked in the back of the facility, meaning I had boxing and shipping and racks and storage building of storage systems. And we were just all lined up 3 shifts, 7 supervisors per shift, and everybody came from Fort Hood. We were all infantry officers, armor officers, artillery officers running that factory. It was a great experience.
That's fantastic. And so then you kind of, before you went off to the FBI, you spent some time at Supply Solution. What was that?
Yeah, that was software sales. So I was at Dell. One of the big things that Dell was famous for was this just-in-time inventory, and kind of revolutionized just-in-time inventory, and basically at the end of the quarter holding 0 inventory, so that your profitability numbers are much better if your balance sheet is holding 0 inventory at the end of the quarter.
Yep.
So anyway, it was a very kind of every quarter end was like a crisis exercise, right? I mean, you're just cranking through to try to get everything shipped out the door and expend all the inventory to include all the components. So I got hired by a company called Supply Solution, which was a software startup managing supply chain as an ASP, application service provider, the predecessor to SaaS. And the reason I got hired is because I had a friend from the Army who had just started working there. he told his boss about his buddy that was at Dell, and they really wanted Dell was a great juicy whale of a target for them, so
Sure.
they hired me, and I spent my time there working on landing and expanding the Dell account for them.
So actually, like early in your career, you're early exposed to technology and software, and how companies could leverage it to make efficiencies. Correct?
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. And I got bit a little bit by that bug, and then still stayed on my life course, and then somehow got back to it.
All right. Well, so we'll put a pin on that and come back to it. And so then
Yeah.
you got your dream job. You got to the FBI.
Yeah.
Tell us about the process of going through Quantico.
Oh yeah, Quantico. Well, Quantico is like it's like Harvard, right? It's hard to get in there, but once you're in there, you're gonna get through it. It's particularly if your background is military and you've been away from family before, you've been through schools before, you've taken PT tests before, those kinds of things are not super challenging. The nice thing about Quantico is all your friends are there, the food's there, the gym's there, everything you need is right there.
Good.
Really, the most challenging thing for most people is the outside stressors, meaning, a lot of guys took big pay cuts to go in the FBI, and their families are in California with 3 kids and typical family drama with kid illness and, late, it's hard to pay the bills when you take a 50% pay cut and all those kinds of things. But for me, Quantico was just I was happy as I could be because I was finally where I wanted to be. And it wasn't particularly hard, but it was particularly good. And I would say the most kind of extraordinary thing about the FBI Academy, specifically at Quantico, is that it is the best, without a doubt, the best handgun training in the world, with the best handgun trainers in the whole world. Because, many of us come out of the military and we don't spend a lot of time with handguns because you're in the military, you're in the Army, you're shooting a rifle. Yeah. But I mean, these guys, it is world-class handgun training, and at the end of Quantico, even people who were really novice or really not great at the beginning come out of there pretty well. But it was a great experience. I had a wonderful time there. 16 weeks flew by.
Okay, good to know. So for everyone who's sitting or watching the show, if you have a question for Matt during our conversation, please look at the bottom right-hand corner. You're going to see a picture of me with an oval. It says add a comment. Please go ahead and type in your comment and submit it. As long as you keep it clean and PG, we'll bring it to Matt's attention. So please bring your questions to us. So Matt, so now you're out of the Quantico and you get your first assignment. It looks like you're going to San Diego with the FBI. How'd that go?
Oh, yeah. So, back in that time, you listed the field officers 1 through 56, and whoever in the class got their lowest number had to, buy pizza and beer for the rest of the class or something because they got the lowest number. But anyway, San Diego was my 7th choice.
Okay.
It was just an outstanding, turn of events. So I got assigned to San Diego. I got assigned to a street gang task force where I was working street gangs and prison gangs. The squad hadn't, it was after 9/11 now. It was 2002. And at the time, right after 9/11, many agents were moved from criminal squads to terrorism squads. And so, this squad hadn't seen a new agent in many years. It was a lot of senior agents who had been around for a long time. So I got there and had the good fortune of meeting some of my lifelong best friends and doing some outstanding work. And a lot of people ask me what this painting here to my left is. It's a painting of a Mexican mafia member that we arrested in the process of a kidnapping. Oh wow! And the prosecutor painted that picture for me. That's his mugshot. The prosecutor ended up painting his mugshot and gave it to me when we convicted him of a kidnapping for ransom and a drug conspiracy, and he got sentenced. He's likely going to die in prison in the next couple of years, but he was sentenced to more than 70 years in prison. So, we were working big cases against the Mexican mafia, against some of the street gangs in California. I remember sitting a wiretap shift early on when I got there, and the show The Wire was just season 1 was on TV in the Wire room, and the guy that we were listening to was a local rapper who was a gangster, and we're like watching The Wire on TV and seeing and listening to it play out in real life, and it was like art imitating life, imitating art. You know, it was just unbelievable. So I had a great 7 years there.
Yeah, great. So from San Diego, you moved on to back home to Washington D.C. How was that?
Yeah. So San Diego, the FBI was trying to provide incentive to get people to come back to FBI headquarters as supervisors, and so they were offering long-term temporary assignments. So I got to spend 18 months in one of those assignments. I worked at the gang unit at the headquarters, Safe Streets and Gang Unit, which basically managed the entire gang program for the FBI,
Wow.
providing resources, working with the Department of Justice to move some of the bigger cases through, and that was a great year and a half, and ended up leading me to my next job in Chicago.
So Chicago, that's a big city and big problems. So tell us about your 5 years there working in Chicago.
Yeah, so over the course of that part of my career, I sort of developed a fondness for it, an expertise in street gangs, and I learned through my time there that basically half of the street gangs in America were either in Los Angeles and Chicago, and the other half were all over the rest of the country. So I wanted to work in Los Angeles or Chicago, where at ground zero, right? So I got a job as a task force supervisor in Chicago, working street gangs on the south and west side of Chicago, and it was I had a Chicago police sergeant as a partner, and we had 10 FBI agents and 10 Chicago police officers, and we were making cases against the most violent gang leaders and gang members in the city, and it was a lot of fun. And I had already kind of learned through my SWAT days and my street days about risk, personal risk, managing personal safety risk, but as a supervisor, deploying agents every day into the south and west side of Chicago, it gave me a whole new kind of approach to the routineness of high risk operations and how to avoid becoming complacent, even though you are taking significant risks every day. So learn some tricks on that.
Yeah, Matt, I think that's a great point. And I think what you just said there applies to every facet of risk, whether it be law enforcement or you're in charge of a risk manager for a manufacturing multinational. Is complacency has a tendency to, it hasn't happened, therefore I don't need to plan for it. That where things can really you get complacent. Therefore, when the actual boom goes, you find out you're prepared for it, and it can be the response and the result is actually probably worse than what it had been if you'd stayed vigilant, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some ways to really keep that sharpness as a leader is to not just be so focused on you and your team and what you have going on, but have awareness and seek out information about what other people are doing, how they're getting impacted by risk, how they're mitigating risk, and what's happening. For example, in that scenario, like my squad might have gone 6 months without a shooting or a near fatal situation or a crash, but it doesn't mean everybody went 6 months without those things. And when they would happen, we would talk about them so that we could learn from and be thinking about just how dangerous this job is, even though we haven't had a problem for the last 6 months.
No, I think that's very. I mean, that's a great point. I think what you just said there is like kind of key point of any sort of incident, whether it be in the military or manufacturing or cyber, whatever the case. That after the incident, you want to examine it and find out, what can you learn best practices to, again, be prepared the next time. Hopefully, improve your response rate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
And just because something's high impact, low probability, that means if you wait for it to happen to you, you're not going to learn from it, right? You got to take advantage when it happens to somebody else.
No, I think that what you just meant there was very much in the news recently, as far as there's low probability that the Francis Scott Key Bridge is going to collapse in Baltimore, and I think people found out the hard way about that one. So
correct. Yep.
So you're in Chicago, so now you're going back home for DC for a while. So you're going from section chief counterterrorism to deputy assistant director of counterterrorism, and then obviously special agent in charge of the Washington office. Talk about your time back in DC.
Yeah, so my boss in Chicago, after I'd done a few years as a supervisor, he promoted me to ASAC, and then after about a year and a half, he said, "Hey, you need to go back to the counterterrorism division because ISIS is a big problem, and I think you should do that." And I really had been just working gangs and violent crime and some corruption my whole career, and didn't have a lot of confidence that I could do that. He's like, no, well, you're going to have to do that. So I went back to the counterterrorism division. My first job was a great one. I had basically the responsibility for all overseas source operations that the FBI was participating in with our partners, either foreign partners or intelligence agency partners.
Oh.
So that job obviously took me all over the world and exposed me to many other agencies that when you work street gangs, you don't get exposed to the to MI5 and ASIO and these foreign intelligence services. So it was a really good learning experience. And then I ultimately, after a year and a half of that, got to lead all counterterrorism operations globally for the FBI. So, I got to go to Syria and Iraq and, understand what our job was there, who we're working with, our military partners there, primarily these tier one special operations units. And then got to spend a lot of time advising policymakers through the National Security Council about the threat and about what tools the FBI brought to the threat. Worked very closely on all the U.S. hostages, some of whom are still being held overseas by terrorist organizations, and really got to see at a global level the government's counterterrorism efforts during the heyday of ISIS. So it was a wonderful growing experience and just a super rewarding job.
So Matt, I mean, not to put you on the spot, but can you ballpark it? How many different countries you've been to during the course of your life for the FBI?
45 or 50, I'd say probably. Yeah.
All right, we'll put a pin on that.
Not all garden spots, but sometimes, sometimes they are though.
Yeah, we'll put a pin on that and come back at the end of the show. We'll talk about the countries you fill it. So, so then the opportunity comes. Like you and the rest of the country, you get an opportunity to go to Dallas. So tell us about your time here being special agent in charge of the Dallas office.
Yeah, so Dallas is a place that I had tried to get to at multiple points during my career, just because it's always been a great office. It's a big office. There are 4 FBI offices in Texas. Dallas and Houston are very large. San Antonio is actually a pretty good sized office too, and then El Paso is a relatively small office. But Dallas just has always had the reputation. President Kennedy was killed in Dallas, right? Dallas is a place that's a good place to live. But from an FBI perspective, there's really good work across all programs: counterintelligence, counterterrorism, cyber, violent crime, corruption. We got it all here in Dallas, right? And so when you're from a job satisfaction standpoint in the FBI, it's hard to find a good place to live and a good place to work. For example, San Diego is a great place to live, and I found really good work there. But not everybody finds good work in San Diego. But the living is wonderful. New York is a great place to work. The work is off the charts, but it's really hard to live there if you got a wife and 4 kids. It's just hard living.
Yeah, exactly.
Dallas is kind of the best of both worlds. And as a special agent in charge of the FBI, you really have autonomy because we all work for the deputy director, and he's got like 80 plus direct reports, which means he has really no direct report. You really are entrusted with significant responsibility to make decisions, to mitigate risk, and to move operations forward. So it was a great job. It's a great office. I had a really strong subordinate leadership team, some of which I inherited, some of which I picked. But I inherited a good team and then built on that team. And, it was just a really outstanding 4 years in a place that I knew that I wanted to live, and in a place that I knew that I wanted to finish my career and stay and do my next career.
Good. So, I think you and I chat offline. So obviously you've had 20 years in the FBI, and then you're in Dallas, you can charge, you involve a lot of high profile cases. But the call was being made by the director to bring you back to DC. But that didn't sound like something you wanted to do. Can you walk us through that sort of process before you figure when you knew it was time to make a change?
Yeah, I mean, I was on borrowed time, and to be able to stay as an SAC, the SAC job is considered by all my peers as the best job, right? And Dallas being one of the best, if not the best places to do that job. And so I knew I was on borrowed time after I finished 3 years that, it would be expected of me to go back there. And then I was directly being asked to go back there. And I was also approaching age 50, at which point I would have had 25 years of service and been eligible to retire. And I just really kind of thought about that for a long time and decided that for my family and for my own, professional success, the best thing to do would be to transition into the private sector. And so in the process of doing that, I started exploring many different options and trying to kind of figure out what I was going to do when I grew up. Because I just finished 20 years of a job that I didn't even feel like I should be paid for. I mean, it was such a privilege and a joy to do it. So
Yeah.
I knew that I wanted to have a job after the FBI that I could actually care about, right? That I could get up in the morning and want to go do, because a lot of my colleagues that I talked to who had left said, yeah, it's good. The money's really good. But, it's kind of, I don't really care that much, and I want to care. I want to care about my job.
No, agreed. I think that's the success in life. If you want to be just happy, is this, if you work, if you enjoy what you do, you never work a day in your life. And so I can totally agree with you. When I've had jobs I didn't want to go to sleep on Sunday because that means I had to go to work on Monday. And then I've got jobs like now I totally enjoy what I do on a daily basis. So it makes all the difference in the world. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
So how did the concept of you're thinking about retiring, and was Verfico a option, or did you retire and then Verfico came out? How'd that sort of play out?
Yeah, good question. So, throughout by March or April of 2022, when I knew that, my eligibility was approaching and I had to make a decision if I was going to go back to DC or retire, I started looking at options, and I was looking at all the normal, security related options, corporate security gigs. And I had good traction with some of those, but I started talking to my brother about what he was doing. And my brother, Nick, owns a drywall company. He and his partner own a company called Rock Spring Contracting in DC. They're a large drywaller. We were just talking in general about different things. And he said, listen, if you are interested in this, we got hit with a wage theft suit. We didn't even know what wage theft was. We had the problem. The DC Attorney General sued us. We had to settle it. And we created a system, because we couldn't find a system on the market. We created a system to force our subs into compliance, and it's something you might want to look into. So he said, basically he said, look, this is what it is. This is how we use it. This is how it works. It's not ready for prime time. It's just our company that uses it. But if you think that there's a market for it and it's something you want to do, we can look at transferring that asset to a separate company, and then you build a company around the product, re-engineer the product, and take it to the market, because I think it solved a real problem for us, and we're a good size contractor. It's likely that it could solve that problem for other people.
So Matt, let's put 1 second, but again, if you're late to the show, we're having a conversation with Matt DeSarno, former head of the FBI in Dallas, and now the president and CEO of Verfico. If you have a question for Matt, please look at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You see a picture of me next to an oval says add a comment. If you have a question for Matt, please go ahead and submit it and press enter. And just all I ask is keep it clean and PG, and I'll bring it to Matt's attention. So, Matt, so you talked about wage thefts. Can you just give us a quick dummy explanation of what that is?
Absolutely. So wage theft is the practice of underpaying or not paying in compliance with wage and hour laws, right? And it's typically not necessarily the company that's building the building that's doing that, right? Or that's running the restaurant. So in a multi-tiered labor environment where you've got an owner, a general contractor, and a bunch of subcontractors, or a large company, a prime contractor, and a bunch of subcontractors, anywhere at the bottom of that ladder of supply chain of people, often is a hourly worker. And if that hourly worker is not paid in compliance with the wage and hour laws, there are different levels of kind of risk that each of those people face. There's a lot of reputational risk for the person at the top, because if there is a problem or an allegation of a problem or a lawsuit, the headline is going to read, Microsoft data center at top, right? There is direct risk from GCs in many states. And then obviously the trade subcontractors carry a lot of the risk because they want to protect the GCs, and they're the ones employing lower tiered subs who may be doing this. The original sin of wage theft is often the misclassification of workers at scale as independent contractors. If workers are misclassified as independent contractors, they are open to exploitation. The challenge for the higher tiered companies, owners, general contractors, and trade subs is they have really no visibility of what's going on below them. They can't see what's happening with regards to the payments. So our tool, our main goal of our tool is to create some transparency and shine a light on fraud, theft, or cheating in that ecosystem.
Yeah.
it could be wage theft, meaning it could be that workers are getting ripped off and their bosses are pocketing the money. It could also be the other way, right? It could be that subcontractors are inflating invoices and forcing change orders and playing games with labor in order to get more money out of their customer, right? So our tool can detect both of those things.
So, Matt, you and I talked about this, and I think, I find what you guys are doing very fascinating, because it's, I do risk management insurance for construction firms, and I help my clients with try to reduce their exposures, and if it's possible by transfer of insurance, standard, general liability, workers' comp, auto, builders risk, the whole shebang, cyber. But not every risk is these days transferred by insurance, but there doesn't mean it can't be mitigated. So, if you think about it, what sets apart your firm from traditional insurance offerings available to construction companies?
So, the big thing is, like you just said, I mean, it's really hard to buy meaningful insurance coverage to mitigate the risk of wage theft. Most, you may be able to get something in a D&O policy or an EPL policy that'll provide you $100,000 in defense only, right?
Yeah.
But most wage theft suits far exceed $100,000, and there are often penalties and back wages and fines that need to be paid that you can't cover with insurance. So, where we come in is we believe that the current efforts to mitigate wage theft, either through government regulation, through legislation in some state houses, through 100% union work, all those things that could, or through wage scales, all those things are designed to kind of prevent wage theft. But the vast majority of them, particularly the legislative and regulatory pieces, they just try to correct it after the fact, right?
Mm-hmm.
We believe that through leveraging technology, it's possible to actually prevent wage theft, right? That's our goal, is to prevent it before it happens, so that we don't have to have lawsuits and workers don't have to wait 9 years to get paid. There was a recent case where the cleaning crews of the Cheesecake Factory throughout many restaurants in California sued and were awarded back wages for wage theft and penalties and interest, but they're getting paid 9 years later. Jeez. I don't need my salary 9 years from now, even with interest and I need my salary now, right? Yeah. So, I believe that anybody who swings a hammer all day should get paid rightful wages for that, right? And likewise, I think if a company contracts with another company and that company is supposed to provide 80 people to do the job in a week, and they only sent 60, and they billed you like they were sending 80, that's not. We don't like that, right? We don't like cheaters. We're trying to identify, allow companies to identify where they're being defrauded or cheated, and also where some of their companies might be exposing them to risk that they really shouldn't be exposed to.
So, Matt, can you help us kind of maybe walk you through, or we're talking conceptual, can you maybe walk us through specifically how the platform works as far as how this process is done to reduce this wage theft exposure?
Absolutely. How our tool prevents it, right? Is that what you're looking for? Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So there are, I'll tell you what, compared to what's out there are lots of timekeeping systems and access control systems out there, right? They exist to control access and keep time. There are also several prevailing wage compliance tools that exist to help companies comply with Davis-Bacon requirements or other prevailing wage requirements. And then there are lots of, those two kind of key areas. But what we do that's different is really both of those things. Like we collect time worked information from the worker and paid information from the payer, and then we reconcile it. So I'll walk through that more clearly.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, we primarily use a mobile app as a timekeeping system. Now we can use an existing timekeeping or access control system and ingest that information. But our goal is through either our mobile app or through an existing system, collect the time worked information from all workers on a job, regardless of who they work for, right?
Okay.
Most of the timekeeping systems are specific to employer tracking his employees' time. We are tracking every employee's time for our customer, right?
Yeah.
On a job. We bring in all that information, and then we work with every single subcontractor on any specific job and ingest their payroll reports.
Okay.
So we've created an AI-powered engine to ingest payroll reports in any format, right? Because we thought we could integrate with 5 or 6, and it'll probably cover half of the people, and the other half we'll figure out. Well, 5 or 6 doesn't even cover 10% of the people. There's hundreds of payrolls out there.
Yeah,
so
sure.
So we can pull it in any format, right? It's encrypted in motion, encrypted at rest. We normalize that data, and then we reconcile it. And then we present for our customers basically risk scores for all of their subordinate contractors. And we can show them specifically where people may have been not paid overtime, working over 40 hours, or where we see this guy showing up on the job and we don't see any pay records for him at all, right? And so if you're thinking about a large, $500 million construction job with 300 or 400 different companies working on it at any given time, there's no way that owner, that CM, that GC, or that owner's rep, or any of the people who are interested in mitigating the risk on the project, this wage risk is just overwhelming to them. They can't see anything. They don't know anything. They're just waiting, hoping nothing happens, right? Yeah. Well, our tool allows them to pinpoint accurately where there may be a risk, and then work directly with that company who they might not even have known before that third tier sub was even on site, right? Yeah. So that's how it works.
Well, that's fascinating, because it sounds like, like it's not saying in real time, but it seems at least as long as you get the payroll reports on at least every weekly or biweekly the process, it'll be a lot more timely. So it
is. That's a huge value to the customer, right? Instead of this going on for 3 years and then you getting a subpoena about it, you can see within a week. I mean, the payroll, almost all of our customers are on a weekly pay cycle, right? So if we're reconciling the payroll weekly, our customer will know last week, ABC Flooring had 3 guys who showed up all week, and I don't see any evidence of pay, right? I need to see what's going on there.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like, with my line of work, I'm always trying to understand what some emerging trends are for risk and try to give my clients a heads up of what's coming down the pipeline. So, from your perspective, and you're dealing with owners and subs and GCs, I'd love if you take a moment to think about, what are some of the emerging trends or challenges in the construction industry that your firm is seeing, and how has it been able? Can you think of being addressed through technology and services?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the biggest trends that everyone's talking about is a labor shortage, right? I mean, there's a labor challenge, and I think that one way to set yourself apart in a labor strained environment is to be able to demonstrate to the potential workforce out there that you are taking steps to make sure that they get paid for the work they do, right? This idea that wage theft is not an issue for owners and general contractors is a misconception. Construction leaders, this is strategic liability for them with far-reaching consequences, and it's especially frustrating because in many cases, general contractors they're not doing it knowingly, right? They just simply have limited visibility. So, while we're all kind of trying to figure out how are we going to make up this deficit with regards to the number of workers that we need in order to build what we need to build, I can't think of any more incentive than, hey, you will get paid what you are owed if you work for this company, right? Because in the industry, that is a challenge. And so we believe that we can provide that type of reputational reinforcement for subcontractors and general contractors, so that if it's between working for company A who uses Verfico and company B who doesn't, and I'm a worker, well, I want to work for company A, right?
Amen. If you're watching the show, you have a question for Matt, look at the bottom right-hand corner. You'll see my face next to the oval, add a comment. Please type in your comment for Matt, and we'll bring it to his attention. So, Matt, obviously, like anything else, I'm talking to clients and trying to, get some, win their business. And then when the question, they want to see some, like, what have you done? What's your success stories? So can you tell us any case studies or success stories that Verfico has been able to provide into the construction industry?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So I'll tell you one. we had a customer. I'll tell you a few. One will be kind of more macro. One will be sort of more specific, anecdotal, right? So, what we have found, one of our larger customers, when they implemented Verfico and forced all their subs to use Verfico, what they really did was they professionalized those lower tiered subs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they said you got to put your folks on payroll. We got to use Verfico. So now that those lower tiered subs are now they got to create payroll if they weren't doing it before, and then they have to figure out how to manage this. Well, if I'm a third tier labor broker and I have 100 guys that I pull from for my jobs, and one or two of my customers are saying you got to use Verfico on my job,
Mm-hmm.
you got to put them on payroll, use Verfico. Well, then I know, okay, now I got to take 40 of these guys and put them on payroll. I'm not going to put all 100 of them. I'll put 40 on payroll. Well, I'm going to put my 40 best guys on payroll, right? So now our customers now start seeing the same guys on the job over and over and over. So fewer safety orientations, fewer incidents,
Mm-hmm.
better quality, better efficiency. So what we've seen with our customers over time have used Verfico the longest is a reduction in labor costs as a percentage of revenue, right?
Okay.
The idea is that it would cost more to use Verfico, but the reality is it costs less because you have less downtime, fewer safety incidents, and higher quality. You can actually be much more efficient, and that's on the labor front, but also on the PM and office front. When using Verfico, our customers have found that their PMs can handle more jobs. They can schedule more jobs. They can handle more daily reports per PM. So, there's really good efficiency there. I would say a more kind of practical one is we had a customer who was using Verfico who got sued for wage theft as part of a large suit that many people got sued in. And because they were using Verfico and because their sub had actually misused Verfico outside of the terms and conditions of the use agreement,
Mm-hmm.
They were able to quickly get themselves removed from that case. They passed all their legal fees onto that sub, and they had no problem, which is a very rare situation for someone involved in a wage theft suit.
That's awesome. I mean, because like anything else, the proof is in the pudding, and if you can show actionable results, and I think you're touching on something that's my next question, but the concept of labor shortage is an issue. And I don't think it's going away anytime soon. So what is it companies do to be more efficient? And so in my line of work as insurance, I tell people I think insurance is very antiquated how we do things, in the sense that it's still kind of have like those remages of the old boy network or whatever. And I would, kind of slow to adapt to technology as far as how the process of submitting information, renewals, and getting quotes. I think McKinsey's written a paper that, AI could easily disrupt our industry, in the next 7 years. When you think about what your position, because you're dealing in construction and risk management, but not necessarily insurance. But when you think about it, you're leveraging technology to help, drive your company in the risk management space. What are your thoughts on the future of insurance and risk management, particularly in industries like construction?
I think that, from my perspective, I would certainly like to create and develop and build more meaningful partnerships with insurance brokers, agents, carriers, surety bond writers.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we both have a lot to offer each other's business, right?
Agreed.
I'm mitigating a risk that you can't really write a policy for, but your clients who I want to be mine go to you for risk. You're their risk guy, right? They might have an in-house risk manager, but their insurance guy is their risk guy. So I think there's a lot of synergy there. I think insurance in general, with regard to construction, will continue to be as critical, if not more critical, going into the future. And I can see a time in the future where if we're able to grow and scale and collect the kind of data that I think that we are currently collecting at scale, mm-hmm. Then we will be able to feed that to the insurance industry to create new insurance products, or we may become an insurance product at some point, right? It's kind of a synergistic relationship. So, my goal is to find and build meaningful partnerships with the right people in insurance, so that I can help you build your credibility with your clients, and you can help get me exposed to your clients as a potential direct mitigator of wage theft risk.
Yeah, because I think especially in this age of big data and analytics, every underwriting from an insurance perspective comes down to, the data. Do you have the data? Can you make an informed decision? What do I want to take this risk, or can I, underwrite it, or am I going to go pass? And that's a big point. Parametric has gotten a lot of traction in the years because there's been more data and access points available for, looking at the weather patterns in the past, and as a result, parametric has been adapted more to provide a solution that, the past traditional insurance definitely couldn't do, but also more importantly, maybe what some carriers are really wanting to shy away from, like hail coverage. They don't want to, higher deductibles and, lower limits, which may not be enough to meet an owner's needs. But parametric using data can help maybe come in with a solution that bridges that gap. And I can easily see what you're doing here. If once you get enough data and, sort of, it could be wonderful data from an underwriting perspective, from a surety perspective, or from like a D&O writer, for a fiduciary writer wanting to see your data, what you guys provide to a client. It's part of the process, like trying to tell your story that you're proactive and not reactionary when it comes to risk.
Yeah, we want to be careful not to be building $1 million solution for a $10 problem.
Yeah.
and I don't think we're doing that. What I compare where we are in this journey is like cyber insurance in 2007, right? Yeah. And in general, cyber, or trying to sell cybersecurity in 2007, right? It was something that smart people knew in the back of their head they should have, they kind of need it, but it wasn't until, a few different smaller specialty houses like started writing policies, and then it became more normal and more widespread because there was more data, then it becomes mainstream, right?
So, Matt, I'm kind of running up on time and be respectful of your time. And so this has been a very fascinating conversation, but it's kind of like towards the end, when I have my guests sort of take it off the seriousness and talk about this, Matt, so when you're not busy trying to head up a technology-based construction platform for Verfico, what do you do when you're not busy?
Yeah. Oh man, I do. I'm not very good at golf.
Same here.
I stink at golf, but I try to play every once in a while, but I'm not good at it. I really, people give me a hard time for retiring from the FBI and then starting a company because I work really hard. But when I'm not working, I have 2 young girls. They still like me. They still want to hang out with me. So as long as that's the case, I'll do that. And most of my weekends are doing what they want to do, where they want to do it, how they want to do it. Yeah. We live in Castle Hills. It's a great neighborhood. It's a great place to be. There's a lot of people with kids the same age and lots of the same interests. So we have a good time. And then we travel a good amount. I'm taking my family to New York City in early summer, and then we'll be on the East Coast at the Jersey Shore in late summer. And so, normal things. I like to read too. I like to read when I get a chance, or listen to books if I don't have time to read.
What are you reading these days?
So right now I'm reading the sequel to the most powerful book I read in the last 20 years, which was 2034.
Oh, yes.
And the sequel is out now, 2054.
I blew through that one already. I did that one.
Yeah, I'm like halfway through it in a day. Yeah. I mean, it's really good. But I thought 2034 is like required reading for anybody who cares about the future of our country. So I actually gave it to all my leaders in Dallas and got to talk to Admiral Stavridis, and I asked him if he would do a kind of a book session with my leaders, and he agreed to spend an hour with my folks and talk through the book and answer questions, and he was great. And so he and I, when we were talking in the prep session for this, he had said he had just been in Jake Sullivan's office about Ukraine, and he saw it sitting on Jake Sullivan's desk, and that he was really happy that people were getting what he wanted them to get out of the book. And he just was so generous with his time, taking questions from all my folks and answering questions. It's just that guy is an authority. And if someone's going to write a futuristic novel about the next world war, you want him to write it.
Well, Matt, it's funny you mention that because when I actually reached out to him when I knew the new book was coming out, I reached out to him a couple months ago to try to get him on, but never got a response. So if you got a way to make a trick, make that happen, I'd love to get him on the show.
Okay.
But I completely agree with you on that book, 2034. I read that and it was a great book. eye-opening, and to be honest, it kind of scared the pee at me a little bit. And I completely agree. Everyone should really read that book. Hopefully it never comes, but it goes to show that, whether it be counter-terrorism or counterintelligence, AI, there's so many things that are out there on the horizon that if people don't pay attention to, it's going back to what we were talking about earlier. You get complacent, and when something goes wrong, then you find out you're not prepared. And I think, it truly, and when I've read that book, it was like, I do a lot about international affairs and risk, cyber, and I read all of it. And I read that book, and it sort of put it all together in a book that sort of like, wow, this is real.
And what more credible authors could you have? I mean, they're not fiction writers, I mean, it's Elliot Ackerman and James Stavridis they're also not writing books to make millions of dollars. They're writing books to send a message.
Yeah. No, I finished both. I like the most recent. I definitely, I'm not sure I'm going to give away I might give the ending for you. I like 23rd better, 2034 more than 2054. I think it was better written. Yeah. I think 2054, the kind of, I think in the last couple of chapters that let's get done with it. Let me know what your thoughts after you read it, but I won't give it away. So travel, I'm going to circle back on that concept. 45 countries. So that's an estimate.
That's an estimate. I don't have a count, but I think it's an estimate because I don't know if I maybe only missed one in Europe, so you get 20 knocked out right there.
So maybe you could say, what are your top three, and what are your three you really don't want to ever go back to in your life?
My top three, I would say I love Israel. I had wonderful experiences in Israel. I like working with the Israelis. That was spectacular. Israel was spectacular. I would say my second favorite country is probably France, just because I really like Paris. I think Paris is awesome.
Yeah, agreed.
And third, I mean, it's tough. I like Brazil a lot. I've been to Brazil a couple times. I did like Brazil.
What part of Brazil did you go to?
Rio and Sao Paulo.
Okay, same here.
I like Rio. All three of these places I just mentioned are not particularly like gardens. They're really not. I mean, Paris has lots of terrorist threat. Brazil is really dangerous. Israel is obviously dangerous, but all three of them are just fascinating places. And those are places I like a lot. I like the UK a lot too, but it would be kind of vanilla to include the UK. I think places I don't need to go back to. I don't need to go back to Syria. I don't need to go back to Afghanistan. I don't need to go back to. I don't need to go back to Iraq. I'd be all right if I don't have to go back to those places.
What on a book?
I would like to go to Jordan again. I would go to Lebanon again, but Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, not again.
Well, to maybe you go along the lines of what you were talking about from book, and 2034 is a wonderful novel, but it's also based on fact. Another book you might be interested in as far as Syria, you may have read it, was a Damascus Station by David McCloskey. He's former CIA. He spent time in Syria, and so it kind of, I'm almost done with that book right now too. So it kind of says, I don't think I want to be in Syria either. So
no, you don't want to be there.
Matt, hey, I want to say thank you so much for your time. This has been a great conversation. I think what you're doing there is great. It's on guard. It's technology based, and I think it's definitely filling a gap in the construction industry that needs to be filled. And like you said, with labor being shortage, companies need to be more efficient. And I think what you're doing here is kind of trying to fill that gap. So
yeah, absolutely.
Matt,
Everybody feel free to reach out to me.
Matt, thanks so much for your time. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Brian. Take care.
All right, everybody. So that's been another episode of Risk On, Risk Off. I think it was a wonderful conversation to talk to someone who's basically spent his entire career in risk, whether it be working against violent crimes, counterterrorism, counterintelligence, but just even all his personal background with his family, knowing that what can happen with respects to construction with things like wage theft, which is most people don't even know what that is, but it can be a big financial liability. So it's pretty interesting where technology is coming in to try to reduce exposures and help firms be more efficient. And I think it's also, from my perspective in the insurance industry, an area where definitely room for growth, where more data that can be used or technology can be used to eliminate or transfer risk. I think it'd be very well received. Like all times, guys, I hope we found this show. If there's a certain topic or individual you'd like to see on this, please reach out to me. I'd love to have him. And until next time, guys,